Diego. It's Monday, May 14th, 2018. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people, look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network. Streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe. That's CKWE in Tandanega. You can find us streaming live when we're live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, you can also find shows that are playing kind of in a loop, past shows that are being played on that website at all times, so 24/7. I am John Kane. I am show's host and producer. And we opened up with Resonation from Pappy John's Band, as promised from my last show. And we'll hit a couple other Pappy John's Band songs as we go through the program. Let's see. Well, I want to get into a couple of things, but first, before I go too far, let me say that I am grateful for the responses that I got from my interview on The Takeaway. You know, that was, I mean, it's kind of a big deal. It's a national radio show, international for that matter. Jake was telling me that the BBC actually carries The Takeaway. It is a show that is produced on WNYC in New York, and it is carried by many NPR stations throughout the U.S., Canada, and beyond. So it was the first time that a perspective like mine was allowed to be heard on a national platform. And you know, I expected a little bit some flashback. I thought maybe some people would call me out on this notion that I don't identify as an American, and or if not call me out on it, perhaps disagree with me. And I got to tell you, I got a lot of responses to it, not only because of posting the links to The Takeaway, but also because I featured it in last week's show, and it was all positive feedback. For the most part, most of what I heard from people who either contacted me directly or left messages or comments on Facebook was they were glad somebody finally said that. In fact, a few people said, "Oh, I've been saying that for years," and I guess they were glad to hear that message finally hit a national platform. I will say, had a couple of people, like I said last week on Friday's show, somebody asked me, well, if it's inappropriate to call yourself an American, why can you use the word Mohawk? And I think I qualified that and cleared that up. But I did have somebody who did, one person who was adamantly against my message, and that was a veteran, a Native veteran who boasts of having fought for the U.S. on foreign lands, and who claims that somehow that America can be taken away while everybody's barks at each other's tails was a comment that he made, and then that ISIS can attack while we're all saying I do not identify as Americans. Look, if anybody thinks that me taking the position, or even a good size portion of native people stopped identifying or refused to identify as Americans, that somehow was going to make the United States vulnerable to attack by ISIS, well, I'm sorry, you're misguided. Look, we represent less than 0.7% of the U.S. population, and I'm going to tell you right now, there's no question in my mind that the vast majority of Native people are so assimilated and indoctrinated into the United States in terms of their patriotism, their loyalty to military service, and their religions and their education system, that I would be, I know that as I offered my perspective, that perspective is not that widely held. I know that there are Native people who agree with me, and I've heard from many of them, but I also think the trend is changing, and that was kind of my message with the interview, is that I think young people are questioning more. Look, I just heard a study today that was done that talked about how a larger number of young people are no longer identifying as religious, believing in any faith-based religion, and in fact, they are rejecting the notion of organized religion because of the way it's being pulled into politics and used in terms of politicization. So I think that there is a more critical view being held by the next generation coming up behind me, certainly, and my generation has certainly taken a stronger stance on sovereignty and autonomy and distinction, and I'll never apologize for taking that position, even if there are people even within my family who may think that it's somehow sacrilegious to not claim to be an American. Won't do it. I haven't done it, and I'm not going to do it. So anyway, but I will say I do appreciate the positive response that came from the interview, and of course I talk about those kinds of issues often, so it's not that unusual. Look, I want to. I don't usually get into really spending that much time talking about world events and world politics, but one of the things that I saw today, in light of the United States moving its embassy to one of its consulate buildings from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem, which is in some sort of attempt to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. They moved their embassy there officially, I guess, today, and it was supposed to somehow mark the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. And of course, there's been protests happening in Gaza, over the really oppressive control mechanisms that Israel's placing on Palestinians in terms of controlled movement and fences and that kind of stuff. So a lot of Palestinians have been rushing this this fence, and the Israel military has been firing on them, and they've been doing it for it's been over a month. But because of the increased level of protest that was happening to mark this embassy issue and the Israel's Independence Day, I guess, Israel really opened up, and they killed over 50 Palestinians. Over a half dozen of them were just children. I mean, young. I mean, under 18. Put it that way. And it's really just a travesty. I mean, it is the kind of thing that the entire world should condemn. I mean, and when I hear the United States making the argument, well, Israel has the right to defend itself against somebody with a slingshot. I mean, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about kids and adults throwing rocks at a fence, and perhaps going to try to cut a fence down. And so you just start blasting away at people. I mean, there's been literally hundreds of people that have been shot, and again, dozens that have been killed. I mean, and it is really a tragedy. But I guess what surprises me is how surprised people are that the United States is backing Israel on this. Why is anybody surprised by that? The United States did the same thing to us. I mean, they not only rounded us up and fenced us off, and again, if we're outside of a perimeter, if we're off the reservation, that's where that expression comes from, off the reservation. If we're off the reservation, they could kill us and hunt us down and just murder us. And that's what Sand Creek was about. That's what Wounded Knee was about. So when I hear people saying, I can't believe the United States is backing Israel, why? Why would anybody be surprised by that? I mean, we are more akin to the Palestinians being abused by Israel in our relationship with the United States than any analogy between us and the Jewish people. And in fact, there are a lot of Jews who are condemning what Israel's doing. And you hear about them all the time. In fact, I heard one on NPR today. And of course, I go to New York, and I hear a lot of people on the station that I'm on in New York, WBAI. There's a lot of Jewish people associated with that station, and it's not about being anti-Semitic to condemn what Israel is doing to Palestine, and doing to Palestinians. I mean, it's incredible, and I think the whole idea that people have this misguided view of what Israel represents in the Middle East. It doesn't represent democracy. Palestinians can't vote in Israel's elections. 40% of the population of Jerusalem are Palestinians, and they have no rights there. They are living there as an oppressed people, in much the same way that we lived in our own territories under under authority of the United States, or the United States trying to assert authority over us. I mean, if you don't know what's happening in Israel, then you're intentionally ignoring the topic. And for anybody who can sit there and say, well, Israel's right and the Palestinians are wrong, there's nothing that simple about this thing. And the fact that that some Palestinians are throwing rocks or even burning tires, look, I've been there, done that. So the fact that Palestinians are burning tires or throwing rocks at a fence and are being mowed down by the Israel army, by the Israel military, and the United States, the only thing they can say is, "Oh yeah, we're with Israel on this thing." Hamas is the one that's responsible for all those protesters being killed. Now, Hamas may be calling for the protests, but to say that they're responsible for the deaths, look, I'm just really, really surprised that Americans, and in fact, especially when I hear from Native people, I'm really surprised that Native people could be surprised by this. I mean, it's absurd that anybody can't see the relationship between Israel and Palestine and see the parallels between that Israel-Palestine relationship and the U.S. Native relationship. If you can't see that, this is that proverbial, if those who refuse to recognize history are destined to repeat it. That's what this is. And, and of course I got to go to this place, right? I got to ask the question. So this, record-breaking election cycle that has native people, native women in particular, running for more state and federal offices, national offices than ever before. Where do they come out on this thing? Paula Jordan, what's your position on Israel? What's your position on Israel massacring Palestinians? Because you got to be careful what you say. You want to get elected by a bunch of white people in the United States, you can't condemn Israel because there's this whole thing, this whole evangelical right believe that somehow Israel has to have certain things in place for their Christian prophecies to come forward. I mean, there's this bizarre end of days thing that the evangelical right has, and part of their support for Israel has nothing to do with Israel. In fact, this lunatic that Trump sent out there to this pastor from Texas that offered the prayers out at the opening ceremonies of this embassy in Jerusalem. This is a guy who basically says that Jews, Mormons, and Muslims are all going to hell. They're all burning in hell because they don't believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. I mean, this is a guy who really has a bigoted view, and of course he justifies that bigoted view because he says, "I'm only saying what's in the Bible." Like that document's not bigoted, right? So I mean, look, you look at the view that some of this evangelical right has towards Israel. They don't give a rat's ass about Israel. They just think that Israel is a necessary stepping stone or a necessary part of their faith. I mean, and that's that's the kind of bizarre logic and twist. I mean, like that some of these folks have. But I got to ask that question though. Where do all the native politicians who are running in these non-native elections, where do they come out on something like Israel? I mean, I just got to ask that question, especially those running for national office. Look, Paulette Jordan's running for the governor of Idaho, so I get it. That's a state thing, and so the national position. Because let's face it, the right and the left both overwhelmingly support Israel. Bernie Sanders, the socialist dream, right? Bernie Sanders is one of the first ones to say Israel has a right to defend itself. No matter what Israel does, that's the first line that anybody says. Before anybody even is even willing to begin to criticize Israel, they start off. I mean, even as I'm listening to NPR today, as I'm listening to these reporters interview Palestinians, they keep trying to qualify that this move move to put the embassy in Jerusalem is not an effort to cancel out the two-state solution. That's a load of crap. There's no question where Trump stands on this thing. Trump is so far packed up Netanyahu's butt that he can't make an independent decision. That's why he pulled out of this this Iran nuclear deal, because Netanyahu wanted him to. I mean, when people are questioning, well, who is pulling the strings of Donald Trump? Is it Vladimir Putin or Netanyahu? You take your pick. But anyway, I mean, this isn't normally what I do with this show, but I just feel like there has to be a level of acknowledgement that when the United States is supporting a nation like Israel, they are seeing themselves in Israel. And they're seeing themselves in what they have done to indigenous peoples, which is the exact same thing that Israel is doing to the indigenous peoples of the Middle East, because they aren't it. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Israel was formed from the acquisition, the invasion of land that they think was rightfully theirs from thousands of years ago. They base this whole idea of that Israel has a right to exist based on these biblical and Torah and all this other stuff that really kind of defies any real legal principle. It's really based. It's all about religion, right? It's all about religion, and the fights over religion. That's what And then you look at those three faiths. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. They're all born out of the same, not just the same geography, but the same family. I mean, it's kind of crazy, and so the entire world is being caught up in these religious wars. I mean, it's really kind of pathetic, and of course, when our people get involved in this stuff, so when our people get involved in American politics, you can't separate what America stands for in terms of its claim for freedom and religion, freedom and democracy and everything else, from the reality of what the United States has always been, built on slavery and genocide. And it's still, the United States is still operating on a policy of creating economic disparity. So the wealthy can stay wealthier, and the poor have to work more, because the poor have to do what they can do to support the wealthy. They got to be the consumers. They got to be the workers. I mean, when you think about the view that the Christian nations of Europe had towards black people, towards Africans, and towards Native people, it's like, yeah, we're going to convert you. We're going to convert you all right, but you still have to be the workers, because we're sure as hell not going to do that stuff. And of course, they even had a worker, what people call the trailer trash, I guess, or whatever they want to, their own people, that they had to convince that, look, just because you're poor and white, and you are getting the short straw in the whole white man's American dream thing, just remember you still got people below you. That was the whole thing. At least you're not black. At least you're not native. That was the whole thing. So make sure that even the most lowly white man can feel like they're better than the best black man or the best native person. I mean, this is what the United States has been built upon. I mean, it hasn't been built on justice. I mean, when I look at the condemnation and the outrage that Americans have, China, they're having an undue amount of international influence. Well, what about the United States, for crying out loud? I mean, the United States is all over the globe. The United States is all over the globe, and they've got military presence. I mean, you look at the military bases that surround Iran. I mean, somebody posted up a meme on Facebook, and they said, Oh, look, Iran is definitely looking for trouble in the United States. Look how they position their country so close to all those U.S. military bases. I mean, and there's a certain class of American, electorate that believe that. Yeah, look at them. They're just threatening all those American military bases that surround their country. I mean, the United States has, bases close to Russia. They've got bases close to China. They've got bases close to every part of the globe. If any other country had something like that, the United States would pitch a fit, and does. I mean, it's not just about the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 60s. No, no. I mean, every time there's even the talk about Chinese influence in South America or in Canada or anything else, everybody gets up in arms. Look, I'm not crazy about any of this globalization, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's the United States, Canada, whoever, Great Britain, Europe. I mean, look, I'm against all of it. But there's no good guys and bad guys in this thing. They're all bad guys. I mean, Russia's not the good guy here. China's not the good guy here. But the United States sure as hell isn't either. And when you look at how much conflict the United States has its hands in, again, I mean, this is a country that in its entire existence has only 23 years that it was not involved in some sort of military conflict. I mean, over 200 years old and only 23 years. Only 23 years. 240 years old. And only 23 years of peace. I mean, there's something really, really wrong with that. There's something really, really wrong with that. And you know what? If you don't recognize that and you're living any place in the world, but certainly if you're living in the U.S. or Canada and you don't recognize that, then you're just not paying attention. You're just not paying attention. And I think that any native person who's running for an elected office in the United States or Canada for that matter, they should be asked publicly where they stand on Israeli aggression against the Palestinians. And then ask them and put it into the perspective, to make the analogy between the aggression, the oppression that Canada and the United States have had against native people. And ask those people, because I want them to say publicly to the native people that they side with Israel on this thing. Because if they say they don't, then I don't know where you're going to stand with all those white people you're expecting to vote for it. Because native people aren't going to get you elected. No, Paulette Jordan, white people are going to get you elected. White people got you elected twice in the state legislature. It wasn't native people who got you elected. And to the extent that native people may have helped when you're running for a district within the state, that's a different thing than running for a statewide election. Now it's going to be almost completely. I mean, Idaho is the 7th whitest state in the country. I mean, native people only represent about less than 1.5% of the population. That ain't going to get you elected. And to all the other native people who are running for Congress or whatever. I mean, there's a whole list, a whole slew of native people running for offices. And you got to ask the question: who are you lined up with? Are you lined up in principle with native people, or are you lined up, with the United States and their position on foreign policy? Because you better answer wisely, because it might cost you your job, the one that you're vying for. Which is really goes back to my interview on the takeaway. Because at some point, we're going to be confronted with this question. I mean, that's what's playing out on the Canadian side of that imaginary line. Right now, it's playing out on a daily basis, because the whole idea of the municipalization of native territories is a real deal on the Canadian side. It's a real deal, and every native territory, every native people on the Canadian side is really getting closer and closer to really having to firmly entrench themselves or establish themselves as a Canadian. Because if they try to assert themselves as indigenous, as Ongwengwe, as Mohawk, for instance. I mean, this is the debate that I'm having with some of the folks in Kahnawake on Facebook. I mean, I got some of my friends who are calling out People in Ganawage, are you Canadians? Are you Canadians? And this is one of the things that we hear all the time. And in fact, I even heard it in some of the news coverage of the Palestinian-Israeli thing today, conflict. When I hear people say, well, we have to accept reality. Well, what the hell does that mean? When I hear somebody say that, well, you have to accept the reality is that you are a Canadian or you are an American. No, I don't. For anything, that's not a reality. There has to be some sort of legal foundation to assert that claim. And now, look, I understand that there's money involved in this whole idea of federal recognition and cooperating with the Canadian or the federal government as a tribal council or as a band council. I get all that. But let's be clear, the choices that are being made here. As Native people, we still have the absolute right to assert that we are who we are. We don't have to submit ourselves to their subjugation. We don't have to. Is there a cost to standing up against that? Yes, there is. Yes, I mean, but when I say that there's a cost, it doesn't mean that the United States and Canada don't have an obligation to us. They certainly do, unless they want to pull up stakes and all head out. I mean, and they're not going to do that. So there's still an obligation. The United States and Canada owe a tremendous amount to Native people. In fact, we lost 95% of our lands to them. And there was a commitment that they were supposed to have made with some of those cessions of land. So, I mean, there's a trust fund in Canada that's supposed to be, that it is supposed to be assigned to Native people. And it has to do with all kinds of natural resources and land resources and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting that if I get health care or somebody gets health care in Canada or the United States through their system, that somehow we've forfeited our sovereignty. No, what got forfeited by people long before us was our lands, and there was an obligation that was due to that. The idea of getting some of those repayments back, that's an obligation. That's not charity. And and look, I know they try to recharacterize this stuff as social services and as welfare. I'm sorry, it ain't. It just isn't. And I reject and resent the fact that they even try to do that. And and this is the problem that I have with the clinics and with the Indian Health Service and all this other stuff. The idea that the federal government has an obligation, a debt to pay to Native people, and then they want to skirt around that debt by trying to push some of it onto the state through their Medicare systems, and force Native people to apply for social services. No, that shouldn't even be the case. What should be the case is the federal government fulfill its obligations. But you see, this is all part of that whole system. This is a part of the oppression that still exists. So, when I suggest, especially on the Canadian side, that this is an issue today, and it's a real issue, confronting every one of us, but certainly on the Canadian side first, is this whole idea that Canada wants to subject you to their authority. Question is, do we allow it? Look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break. We'll go out with a little bit more Pappy John's band, and when we come back, I got to talk about what the hell it is that these crazy mayors around here are doing. We'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
teach your children in the classroom. English, history. What do they teach about the Indians? Took us prisoner in your fight to be free. Little white lies, little white lies, little white lies, little white lies. Keep on telling me your little white lies. Keep on telling me your little white lies.
All right. Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, let me give you a shout out to my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420. And I also want to thank some of the friends who help from time to time, guys like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice, Roger Jock, Neville Spring. I want to thank those guys who, every once in a while they'll throw a few dollars our way to help us pay the bills, keep our services going, our online services, our internet, and of course help me make my trip to New York each week to do my show down there. But I also always feel compelled at this point in the show to thank those who have helped us. I mean, I know there are people who used to advertise when we were on commercial radio and that kind of thing. We would not be entering our 9th year right now if I didn't have some of those folks who have helped, even if they aren't necessarily supporting the program like they used to. If I didn't have you during those that crunch time, we wouldn't be here today. So I thank you for having helped when you did. So I want to do that. Look, I want to also thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. I want to thank CKWE again for both the simulcast and the rebroadcast of the show. And I want to thank some of the internet folks, the Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks. And I also want to thank my wife, Brenda, for sharing the show. And for those of you who share the program, whether it's sharing the Facebook live stream or the SoundCloud audios or the YouTube videos. We do have our own YouTube video channel. It's Let's Talk Native TV, and there you can find perhaps our video cleaned up a little bit because we're not as dependent on our bandwidth for the live stream. But we put that video up on our YouTube channel, and you can watch the videos there as well. So those of you who share the program in any capacity, I thank all of you for doing so. Hey, I gotta give a mention. If you haven't watched this, and I know the news is really started to finally pick up on this. There's a lot of stuff happening on the Big Island of Hawaii, and Pele, who is they consider the goddess who of the lava, the volcano, the island. I mean, that is how the islands were born. The native people view these lava flows and these these fissures and all of this stuff differently than white people. For so many, it's this disaster. But for some of the native people, the Kanaka Maoli, they view this as part of the birth and the growth of the island, and they revere what's happening there. The fact that so many people built on some of these areas, and even the native people who were, some of them who may have been forced to because of land being gobbled up by tourists and people looking for their own slice of somebody else's paradise. A lot of this is just illogical. And, native people, even if they did have homes traditionally in some of these areas, they knew that those homes were temporary, that that Pele will unleash and will grow the island at her convenience, and that's the way they view it there. And the whole thing really does come down to what is permanence and what is temporary. And I think what you see in Hawaii is a completely different, not just perspective, I guess, but you have to view it in through different eyes. This is kind of what I say as native people. We're going to be here, folks. We're not going anywhere. And this is what I say to the state. So all the attempts to assimilate us and to indoctrinate us and make us into something that we're not, you're going to get some of us. And you have gotten, I mean, you've wiped out 95 or 98% of our population, for crying out loud. But you know what? There's still some of us here. And it's the same thing I hear out of those folks in Israel and in Palestine. They're saying, look, everything that seems like such a major setback, even the, unarmed people being killed, at the fence, in Israel by the Israeli military. They're saying, look, we're still not going to disappear. We're still going to be here in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, 100 years. There's still going to be Palestinians. So, we have to view things sometimes in a different perspective of time, put it that way. So I just think that that's really necessary. All right. Hey, I got to talk about what the mayors of Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca are thinking. All three of these mayors. Now, first off, the revenue sharing from Seneca Gaming ended over a year ago. It's been, it ended in December of 2016. So it's been a year and a half. No money's flowing to them. And these guys are still putting money in their budgets. I mean, they're still putting money into their city budgets. That's not coming. They know it's not coming. And look, I know that they're lining up behind, Andrew Cuomo, who they hope is going to squeeze, 150, 160, $200 million a year out of the Senecas so they can get their 10 or 7, or in the case of Niagara Falls, they think they earned $20 million, from this. Look, it isn't going to happen. I mean, Niagara Falls, at least the city councilors in Niagara Falls had enough sense to say, look, we're not going to spend $25,000 on a low budget fireworks display when we have a $10 million shortfall in our budget. And of course, now some people are talking about stepping up to try to donate money so they can do their fireworks. I don't even understand why the Seneca Nation does fireworks in some place, at or about the Independence Day for the United States. That's a whole nother issue. That gets into that whole assimilation and indoctrination thing, as far as I'm concerned. Look, you want to light off fireworks in the summer or whatever else, but if it looks like you're trying to take their holiday, I mean, because one of the things that I heard in Niagara Falls, when they first announced that the city council refused to accept Paul Deister, the mayor's proposal to include a fireworks display in the city budget. Deister said the Seneca Nation shouldn't be doing fireworks. It's not their Independence Day. Well, this is one of the rare times that I actually agree with Paul Deister. So mark that one on the calendar. Look, but these three mayors, and the three mayors I'm talking about are Paul Deister from Niagara Falls, Byron Brown from the city of Buffalo, and Mike Smitty Smith from Salamanca. And they all have put gaming revenue into their budgets. This is the budget that goes into next year. I mean, they haven't gotten anything a year and a half, and they're still putting this stuff in their budget. The question is, why? Who are they trying to kid? Who are they fooling? I mean, to put it in there, knowing that it's, for like Buffalo, it's like $10 million that they put in there. Now, some of the folks on the city council are questioning other parts of of Byron Brown's budget, where he's projected revenue that's going to come in from ticket sales of events and a few other things. They're scrutinizing that, but I didn't hear a single city councilor say, "Wait a second, why are you putting $10 million in from the Senecas when they have clearly stated that term has ended?" And the crazy part is, none of these three mayors. And I'm going to get into how bizarre this is, especially when it relates to Salamanca and Mike Smith. But none of these three mayors have actually sat down or authorized somebody to sit down from their city to see what what services the Seneca Nation could somehow offset some costs for, so they can at least have something tangible to put in their budgets. No, they haven't even done that. Buffalo hasn't done. And why? Because they're so lined up. They're so lined up behind Andrew Cuomo. And you know what? Andrew Cuomo knows the money isn't coming. So the fact that he's stringing these guys along, I mean, DiNapoli, the state comptroller, is telling these folks, yeah, you better not put that revenue in there. He told Niagara Falls this, and you'd think that Buffalo would have been a little smarter. I mean, because I don't consider Niagara Falls politicians to be the smartest, group either. But I mean, apparently Buffalo's not any better, because even though DiNapoli warned Niagara Falls not to put the revenue in their budgets, Buffalo does the same thing. Now I got to get to Salamanca. Now, first off, Salamanca is not going to make it. And so what do I mean by that? Well, Salamanca is on Seneca land, and it is in a precarious situation because they leased the land from the Senecas, and then a settlement for that lease came up back in 1990, and the tax base for the city of Salamanca is it's just eroding terribly, because Seneca, it doesn't pay municipal taxes to the so when a Seneca buys land in Salamanca, it comes off the tax rolls. So Salamanca is in trouble. The revenue that they were getting from the casinos represented something like 40 or 50% of their operating budget. I mean, something really significant. I mean, it's a small city. There's nothing compared to the scale of Buffalo or Niagara Falls. But $6 or $7 million a year coming into Salamanca is, it's a lion's share of their revenue, and it's not coming. It didn't come. It didn't come for a year and a half, and it's still not coming. And yet Mike Smith, and here's the bizarre part, Mike Smith is Seneca. He's considered an enrolled member of the Seneca Nation of Indians. And he's the mayor of Salamanca. And even he hasn't met with the Seneca Nation to see what plans they can make going forward. Because here's the deal. Salamanca is not going to make it. It is going to crash. It's going bankrupt. They're going to be forced to lay off more and more city employees, and eventually it's going to be in a situation where there may be some talk of receivership. Now, the Seneca Nation, the last thing the Seneca Nation is going to allow is the state to take over on this failed municipality. But there's not any conversation between the municipality and their landlord, because their landlord is not New York State. Their landlord is the Seneca Nation. So it is bizarre to me that Smitty would go ahead and throw $6 or $7 million in the Salamanca city budget, knowing that it's not coming, and especially to put it in there, list it, as this gaming revenue, because here's the part that really burns me about this, and with all three mayors, but certainly Mike Smith more than any. In order for the revenue sharing, or for them to get, for Smith to get that $6 or $7 million to Salamanca, for Byron Brown to get that $8 or $10 million to Buffalo, or for Paul Deister to get that $15 to $20 million to Niagara Falls, in order for that to happen, the state is going to get 150, 160 million. The state is going to have to win this battle with the Seneca Nation, which isn't even really a battle. It's really bluster. But in order for things to go back the way they were, the state is going to take a huge chunk of dollars out of Western New York. And all three of these mayors seem to be okay with it. They're fine with the fact that $1.1 billion has left Western New York because some change dribbled back to them. 25%, came back to Western New York. Most of it, more than half of it, right to Niagara Falls, and a little bit to Salamanca, and a little bit to Buffalo. But this is the craziness of this stuff. So what these three mayors are hoping is that the state can still wrestle over $100 million out of Western New York, because it'll be 150, 160, 180 million dollars that'll go to the state, and only 25% of that's going to come back. Only 25%. So $100 million is going to leave Western New York, just so these three mayors can hope that they can catch what the state is prepared to drop off the table to them. This is a problem, folks. I mean, I mean, I don't know how these three mayors can't recognize that $1 billion that left Western New York over the last 14 years hasn't had a negative economic impact on the region. Because trust me, the state didn't do anything to promote, didn't even do anything to really promote tourism out here. The tourism in Western New York has not had, had much support from the state. And certainly the Seneca Nation hasn't. I mean, they don't barely even list this, the Seneca gaming facilities, even in their county brochures. I mean, except for the ads that the Seneca Nation has to buy in those things, that's about the only place they're listed. So when I see that these mayors are still listing this money into their budgets, it just makes you question. I mean, are they? I mean, is this a PR move to their constituency? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But there you have it. Hey, look, I got to mention one other thing. One of the things that broke this today on the news, and it's a gaming issue, but it has to do with sports betting. I don't care where you stand on this stuff, but the bottom line is there have been states that have wanted to do that do have gaming, and they have horse tracks, and they have casinos, and they've wanted to do sports betting because Vegas does it, right? And the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for a federal law to, whatever the prohibition has been, whether it's the federal law dictating to the states or whatever, that it's been overturned. So now everybody's chomping at the bit. So the question has to be what's the Seneca Nation going to do? Are they going to open up a sports bar? Are they going to open up a sports betting there? Because here's the problem. If they don't, the state's gonna. In fact, it was on the news today that the state they already have the legislation written, because right now the casinos in New York State could open up. I guess they can open up sports betting right now, but there's no casinos, Class 3 casinos in Western New York. The closest one is on the other side of Rochester, and they're barely making any money anyway. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but the racinos, they can't do it without having some legislation changed. And that's already written. So there's no question that New York State plans to do sports betting, which means if the Seneca Nation doesn't do it, that's going to be an amenity that's offered in the non-native gaming venues that will be designed specifically to take market share away. Here's the thing. Sports betting, even in Vegas, only represents, I think, less than 2% of their overall gaming revenue. But it does bring people to Vegas to gamble in on the slot machines and the table games and all that other stuff. So the whole idea isn't so much that sports betting is going to make a lot of money, but it can draw in players. Yeah, and of course now the NFL and Major League Baseball, everybody's chomping at the bit because they think that somehow they can get a slice of it back, because if they work with sports betting, that somehow a cut has to go to them. And even college athletics is getting into the mix. Of course, the college athletes don't get it, but the universities are hoping they can cash in. It's just an absolute money grab. But at the end of the day, it's probably something the Seneca Nation has to take a look at. Otherwise, they're going to lose market share to the state, because the state's going to go ahead with it. I mean, the state doesn't care about, any questions about ethics or morality or anything else as it relates to this stuff. I mean, that's why their whole strategy for gaming is so flawed. I mean, they didn't build a casino in New York City where they actually have real tourists. They built it in places that it's like a backhanded tax, where they're only fleecing gaming revenue from their own constituency, which is kind of, I don't know. To me, there's something really wrong with this whole idea of creating a revenue stream that's going to cannibalize other forms of entertainment. But that's been the state's logic in all of this. And you can bet the state is going to try to push all of this sports betting into the racetracks. I mean, some of these racetrack facilities have some of the infrastructure essentially built in that they could almost be turnkey to turn a racetrack into a sports betting complex. So once they can get that legislation passed, the question is, can the Seneca Nation create an attractive venue for those who would come and want to do sports betting in their gaming facilities? And it's going to be interesting to see. I would hope, because this was no secret that this was coming. I mean, I would hope the Seneca Gaming Corporation had a vision forward to say, look, we better plan for this. We better draft a proposal so when the legal hurdles are cleared and we're not going to have to spend the money fighting this thing on a legal basis, that we can get out in front of this thing before the state starts to try to take more of our market share, even as they're claiming that they want to they want us to give them a revenue sharing payment for exclusivity, which is kind of a joke all by itself. But I had to mention that because it is a real thing, and it has been kind of all over the news. Supreme Court makes a ruling, and now everybody's chomping at the bit, and and this is really kind of sad in a way, because I mean, this again comes back to this whole notion of what drives our decision making. How do we get in a situation where we have to wait for permission on everything we do on our own territories? I mean, this is part of that indoctrination. And as I said on the takeaway, assimilation is still genocide. If they are trying to make us conform to their laws, to where we got to listen, we got to wait for their judges ruling, we got to wait for their gaming authority, we got to wait for permission from the state or from the federal government on everything we do, that is by definition a diminishment of our sovereignty. So at some point we need to assert this thing, and that's the thing when it comes to this sports betting thing. I hope at very least, although it is the rulings of a Supreme Court that is opening up the door perhaps for anybody, including the Seneca Nation, to look at this thing, I hope they don't get into this whole idea of Mother May I to Andrew Cuomo on this thing. As it is, I think that the Seneca Nation has to move itself, and I don't mean just Seneca Nation, I mean all of the native gaming as far as it relates to New York State. They have got to push back on the state control over what they're doing on their territories, and I feel very strongly about that, and that relates to everything from how much reporting they do to even to things like liquor licenses and alcohol, serving of alcohol at these things. And no matter how you feel about that, there's something really contradictory about saying we do gaming because of our sovereignty, but we need a license from New York State to serve the alcohol there. There's something, just completely incompatible about. I mean, think about the position that we take on tobacco. We sell tobacco products here on native territories without any state regulations, and yet when it comes to alcohol being served by the nation's enterprises, they are totally conforming with state laws. So I mean, to me that's a slippery slope, and it's a dangerous precedent. And one of the things that I've advocated is that the Seneca Nation, if you're going to be involved in alcohol, then you need to create your own scenario for that. Maybe establish microbreweries at your casinos. Seems like a popular thing. Tap into the to some of the winemaking that comes out of this area, and figure out ways that you can import your own alcoholic beverages for your enterprises. That's my view. And again, I'm not an advocate of tobacco. I'm not an advocate of alcohol, and I'm not an advocate of gambling. But I do understand where these things all line up in terms of our economies, and it's unfortunate. But this is kind of where we're pigeonholed, because we need the enterprises that have wide enough operating margins that we can make money and still fight the state every step along the way. If we didn't have the huge margins that our regulatory advantages provide us, we would be inundated with lawsuits and state challenges and seizures and everything else. And it's only because we have enough money generated from these enterprises that we can withstand the challenges from the state. I mean, there's a certain, irony in how many times we faced these guys on these issues. And then I look at guys like Elliot Spitzer, who was the state attorney general and governor for a very short time because of his prostitution issue, and now this Eric Schneiderman, these self-righteous men who want to get in there and talk about what is right and what is wrong and what is legal and what is unlawful. And here's a guy beating the crap out of his girlfriends, punching him in the face. Then he has the nerve. I mean, this is part of the absurdity of this thing. He's got the gall to stand up and tell people, "Oh no, I wasn't really assaulting her. We were role playing. She was playing the role of a punching bag, apparently," and that's his idea of getting off. There's something really twisted about New York State politicians, anyway. I mean, and these attorneys general that come through, these guys have been, just some of the cream of the crop. But I think about Silver and some of the corruption that Cuomo's involved in. It's just amazing to me. I mean, I saw one report that said New York State was listed as the most toxic state in the country in terms of corruption. And make no mistake about it, this stuff crosses party lines. And this is the same thing that I say about the whole Israel thing and the racism issues. That's why I say racism isn't a right thing; it's a white thing. And when I look at just how corrupt these white privileged men are, and the crazy part is, it for all these guys who want to talk about their ethnicities, oh, I'm Italian or I'm Jewish, I'm everything else. No, you're all a bunch of white guys who are living these privileged lives, and that's how you get away with the stuff you get away with. And it's just incredible. I mean, it's one of the things that's fascinating to watch this thing, as a non-participant of that system. And it's when I hear people say, Trump's not my president, and they're an American that's saying it. He is really, but I can say not my governor, not my president, because not my system. And it's part of the thing. I would not lower myself to be a part of what is New York State and what is a part of the American system. And if you really take the time to look at the hypocrisy of American policy and American strategy and state policy and state strategy, it's as corrupt an enterprise as any organized crime family you that anybody's ever seen. I mean, it's and if you think for a second that this is like just this open field of candidates who get to run, that it's not somehow dynastic. I mean, you only have to look at the Bush family or the Clinton family and their attempt, or the Kennedy family and their attempt. And you know what? What's more, just take a look at how enamored the American public is going to be with this quote unquote royal wedding coming down the pike. It's amazing to me that grown adults can be stuck into this idea of princes and princesses. Next thing fairies and unicorns or something like that is what it's just mind blowing. But that's what we got to deal with, folks. And that's why that's a reality that I'd rather not be a part of. And that's why I say I'm not American. All right, folks. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you in a few days, and we'll be right back here. Thank you. Yahweh.
I got the key to the highway. Lord, if I decide to go, I'm gonna leave here running. Walking moves me too slow. I'm going back to the bar.